Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Winning with Insights podcast. My name is Mike. I am the founder of GTM Diagnostics, a go to market research agency specialized in win loss analysis. Today, with me is a very special guest. We have Jamie. He is the founder of GTM Factories, which is a product marketing and go to market consultancy. Jamie, thank you so much for joining me here today to share your story. And before we begin, maybe you can quickly introduce yourself and also take a little bit of like a throwback to everything that you've done in the past decades, basically.
Oh, you're making me feel old, Mike. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, so I've been in B2B SaaS for over 20 years. I started off at a procurement startup here in Pittsburgh uh, that got sold off 3 years later, and I worked through development programs and was a software engineer for a little bit. Worked as a product marketer or product manager rather for a bit. Uh, was with a Dutch governance, risk, and compliance company for about 11 years. It was bought by NASDAQ, and I worked under that and was in the NASDAQ building. It was pretty exciting and neat to be in. Um, but I've been in the go-to-market space now in one or many roles for the last 10 years. And when I say, go-to-market, I look at product, marketing, sales, and success as the entire go-to-market team. To be successful, they all have to be sort of going in the same direction and understanding the same messaging and all providing their point of view and perspectives that make the whole machine work. So yeah, that's where I'm at. And I've started this company up about 6 months ago and decided that, I could help a lot of startups. I've been in other startups that are probably at a higher stage in their journey. They were already at 100 million in revenue and looking towards a billion. But I'm really focusing on smaller startups that have already, hit revenue about 5 to 10 million and are looking to, get to about 100 million.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting background that you have. Like you have had some like pretty cool experiences with a couple of businesses that a lot of people might know actually. So that's really awesome. And then like your point of view, like, hey, like on the whole go to market, that it should be like as one, basically, with the same like direction that everybody's working towards. I can only like align with that. Hey, but before we get into like the entire interview,
Mhm.
um, I always have like this question, which is basically around product marketing. Because within marketing, there are many different disciplines, maybe if you want to call it like this. I wonder, like, what does product marketing actually mean?
Yeah. So um, when I look at go to product marketing, I always look at it as a strategic partner with the product management team. Um, and I always teach that, product marketer's job is to be the voice of the market to the product organization and vice versa, be the voice of the product out to the market. So in the first step, you're really talking about doing all the necessary research. And this isn't to say that product managers don't do research, but I think product marketers tend to interface with the external public, the customers, the prospective customers, analysts, partners, etc., and also indirectly through salespeople, solution engineers, SDRs, customer success people, to really formulate an understanding of what the market is saying and how they're reacting to things and what their needs are, and translate that to what product marketing or product managers eventually build. And then on the flip side, you have things where, you know, you have to craft messaging. You have to say, we built this to solve a particular problem in our unique way. And that is going to be eloquently communicated out to the market, as well as communicated to our internal folks. So we're all saying the same thing, more or less. It doesn't have to be robotically verbatim, what we're saying, but the message needs to be consistent and it has to be powerful. So that's in a nutshell what product marketing does, is be that sort of right-hand partner to product.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very clear definition. I like the fact that you basically put them in between the internal teams, the market, and the product management um, within the organization, and basically provide them with the insights necessary to actually translate everything that you guys are doing into solutions that or that are built to solve the right problems, and that you're communicating about them in the same way. Um, but if you compare this then, for example, to brand marketing, where they're maybe trying to send out a certain message about the business itself, how does it then relate to the product marketing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, when you're a founding company, a very early on startup, your brand is your product, right? You have one product normally that you're going to market with, or at least that's the most optimal thing to do. In the way you deliver that product, whether it be the software experience or the sales experience or the community around that product, all of those things eventually become your brand. And it's like giving yourself a nickname. You can't give yourself a nickname. You inherit the nickname that other people give to you, right? So your community, your product experience, your sales experience, all that starts to shape what your brand becomes, but then you need to reinforce it and understand that and hear it through the lens of the external people, right? They need to tell you what that is. Um, so all this to say, early on, your brand is your product, your N1 product, right? But over time, if you become a portfolio company and you're adding additional products or you're nuancing the offering, you have one main product, but you can offer it different ways, then that starts to, take shape, and each one of those products or offerings has its own messaging. But overall, you need to have a brand that people recognize and they understand that they do a lot of different things that all fit the same purpose and they do it in their unique way. This is what makes them special. This is what people say about them. And that's what brand marketing is there to do, is capture that information and then amplify it over and over again in a repeatable way.
So what would you then say would be like the right moment for a business to bring in somebody that has like a product marketing background or is specifically focused on product marketing?
Well, Mike, I would say there's two things to this question. I would say there's a difference between having a brand and requiring that brand person to be in-house. So I think that there's two different ways you can approach that. Early on, I think that maybe a brand agency temporarily would be a good fit to just come in and do the research to tell you what that is, but it's not an ongoing thing that they need to be in-house to do. I would say, you know, I wouldn't put a time frame around it, but a moment would be right around your, exploring new opportunities, right? When you want to explore a new market segment or a new extension of your product, you're already starting to add new products or new offerings to your portfolio. And that might be a good time to explore your brand. It's too early. I mean, if you're growing really rapidly, like who knows when the right time is to do that? I just don't know that you want to start by trying to establish a brand. I think the product marketing definitely has to happen before brand marketing, because you really can't have a successful brand identity until the product really takes off or the products that you offer as a
Yeah.
company really start to take off.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Because in the beginning, as you said it, like because it's all tied back to each other, like basically building your initial brand is very much also about like positioning your product within the market. So there's this thing that you said, like, hey, once you get like some traction, you start growing. Like we're going into that segment a little bit later on, but I first want to like get a good understanding of the types of businesses that you mostly look forward to working with.
Wow.
So is there like a specific, because we talked about like the B2B the startups
Mhm.
basically, and you've already given like sort of like a revenue range,
Mhm.
but who are the businesses that you work most with?
Yeah. So most of my experience has been with sales-led organizations, all B2B SaaS for sure. Um, as I mentioned earlier, I was with a supply chain company, a procurement company, who's been acquired by a rather big organization. Um, and later on was working with another one, another SaaS company that was in anti-money laundering prevention. So they did screening for banks. So when you open up an account, they know who you are and they can report that to, regulators to say, we know who our customers are. And then later
Hmm.
on into a governance, risk, and compliance leader. And governance, risk, and compliance for me has evolved in the 11 years, 12 years that I've been in that space. Um, it used to just be focused on enterprise risk and audit, and then it evolved into a more specialized focus. And then you have other things that sort of branched off of that, like ESG and now AI governance. You have compliance automation that's happening in the IT space. That's also part of that. So those are areas that, domain that I know really well: procurement, GRC, ESG. So I tend to be of the most value to them because,
Hmm.
if you look at what a lot of companies are doing, they're really focused on people that know the product marketing practice itself, but they also really want to have somebody that knows the space that they're in terms of the category of products that they offer. Um, and some will even go a little bit further and say, we want somebody that understands enterprise sales, which is usually more of a sales-led motion because there's usually a lot of high customization and hands-on approaches, a high touch kind of a sale and a high touch, customer success uh, motion that happens beyond that. But I am very interested in, I follow a lot of what's going on in the product led space and self-service motions. And so, uh, by going a bit lower in startups who are relatively newer, a lot of them are starting as self-service PLG companies. And then later on are working on how do I grow into a sales led motion or add a sales led motion, to satisfy enterprise market customers and go for those big dollar deals. So all this to say, my experiences with enterprise and sales led, but I also understand, product led and self-service motions for maybe smaller mid market customers.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, that's a very broad spec. I really liked it when you started with like the, hey, there's like this specific niche of um basically like call it functions or departments within large enterprise organizations where you have like a lot of domain expertise. So when you are like a B2B SaaS that is sales led, selling into those departments or functions, like this is where you have a lot of domain expertise and you bring a lot of value. But of course, there's like similarities between different go-to-market motions. Like there are certain things that always need to be true, basically, and you can also like add value there. Um, so when we are taking it like one step further, so we have like this market identified which you serve. Like what are some of the most common like challenges, or maybe let's put it like, what are some of the most common outcomes that you are working towards with them?
yeah. So I always ask that to center themselves around their business goals, right? Because there's no sense
Hmm.
in working on ethereal things that don't matter. At the end of the day, most companies have some type of growth percentage or revenue goals that they're trying to meet. And when you break that down, that equates to, landing new customers,
Mm-hmm.
and also expanding existing customers, or simultaneously just keeping them as paid customers. And to do that, you need a healthy pipeline of attracting the right customers in the first place. So what I asked them to do initially is start off with, where is your problem? Are you churning too many customers? Is that where you're bleeding the most? Is your pipeline drying up? Are you not getting enough leads to actually even convert into customers? Or is your problem converting leads into actual paying customers? So once you get to that level, then you can start to look at, okay, well, what are some things that we can do to help that particular problem? In a churn problem, you might realize, okay, well, let's look at the data and let's figure out what that's telling us. Who are churning? What are the reasons that they're churning? If you don't know that, that might be an opportunity for us to do research and go back and talk to some of those customers to understand why they left, or why they weren't willing to pay a price increase, and that was what drove them away. Or talking with, uh, customers in the pipeline, or being even involved in some of those sales. That's another method for the research when you have a conversion problem, is doing what I call ride along. Um,
Yep.
Sometimes it's helpful to be there in the moment of the call. I've been in a lot of places where I'm not interrupting the call as the salesperson or the sales engineer is trying to do a demonstration or a pitch. I'm texting with them and say, "Ooh, they said this. Make sure this is a way that I would suggest." And I always put it as, this is the way I would do that, not so that I'm not telling them what to do, but necessarily, this is an idea. This is what I
Right.
just heard. And this is a way that I would probably, turn this conversation or change this. And then on the front end, in terms of, you know, attracting the right customers and having a healthy pipeline of customers that meet your market qualified lead criteria, meet the, band, if that's what you're going for in terms of when they are ready to buy. Um, Understanding, like, where do they go for information? Are we providing enough information on the site? Or are they abandoning the cart before they even decide to go any further? And I've been in a lot of places and seen a lot of customers who are like, you're hiding your pricing, and the only way that they can get to your pricing and even connect with you is through the button that says contact sales. And right now, they're not in a place where they want to contact sales. They don't want to have somebody, coming at them regularly. So we have to figure out a way to keep them interested and give them as much information as they need to know, so that we're really focusing on those that are really, really looking to buy. We're not trying to force them to buy something that they don't really want or need right at the moment. So there's usually
Yeah.
three main areas that I focus on.
Yeah. So it's so when we break it down, we're basically be like, okay, we're trying to attract and close the right customers,
Mhm.
right? And this could then mean that, hey, we actually need to have like new business. We need to expand within our existing book of business, or we need to retain them. And this is basically based on your growth goals, your data, which is basically telling you what is happening where. And then this is your starting point to see like, okay, like we've identified like this specific area. Now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this to actually understand what is happening there. Um, I can imagine that if we're talking about startups and we are talking about like, hey, like the right customer, that there's like this word also attached to it, or like a group of words, like the product market fit, as people would call it. What would you like? What does like product market fit actually mean to you, and what are you looking at to say like, hey, they have it and they don't?
Yeah. Well, so a lot of startups go through a process of just attracting whoever they can. They'll start building a product with a persona in mind, right? And it might be reflective of
Hmm.
themselves, right? A lot of founders build a product that they
Yeah, it's
absolutely
awful.
needed themselves, And so they are trying to sell to other people like them, right? Um, so they will go after that, and they will, they might have connections in that space and be able to say, hey, Jimmy, you're doing this too. I've got this tool or this product now that I think would be helpful. And you have this conversation about how to onboard them, and it might be kludgy at first to get them into the product, but we'll figure out those problems later. Let's work through what does it do for you, and how can we make it better, and does this solve a pain right away, etc. Um, and you got to figure out when's the right moment to charge for that, because I've seen a lot of companies make the mistake of offering way too much value without getting payment, or offering it for free to way too many early adopter customers. And then once they insert a price point, they see this huge attrition because they didn't
Yeah.
realize how many people actually valued it enough to open their wallets. Um, and, I was just talking last night with a group of people in that network, and like, when is the right moment to actually start charging? And it's more about a feel. Like, if you have got a long runway and you can afford to allow, customers to use their product that you're actually paying for in the background. There's no product that's actually free. There's always servers involved or what have you. So you're paying
Yeah.
something. You've got staff that you're paying, whatever. You have to look at your runway and make sure that you understand, like, this is how much I'm spending over months, so I can allow this to happen for 12 months, 18 months. At some point in that journey, though, in that runway, I've got to figure out how to start to monetize this. Um, and it's only after you start monetizing it that you can actually consider that you have a product market fit. You might have thousands of users, but if they're not paying anything, like, watch what happens when you ask them to start paying. That will tell you whether or not it actually meets their problem sufficiently. Yeah, I think that what I look for is, how do I retain existing customers after they've started paying, even if it's $5 a month, right? Something nominal. That activity of actually opening your wallet and committing an ACH or a wire, charge or a recurring fee, whatever it is, tells you that you've got them and they're willing to do that. Um, and I think there's the rule of 40% is usually what people do, is like, okay, if you can get 40% of your customers to stay with you and continue to recur that payment, then you can realize that you've got at least product market fit. It's not optimal, but at least it's something tangible, and you know that, okay, I can work with that and figure out those people that of them that are paying, and start to focus on them, of like, how do I expand the value that I'm offering to you? Are there other things that I can do prior to the process that I solve for, or post that problem or process that I solve for? Like, what's after that? What's before it? Where can I add more value? Are there things that you're doing simultaneously that I can bring into that? And that's the gold. Once you get to that point where you can figure out, okay, how do I increase the value? How can I do things, around it? Then you're working with it.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Like the rule of 40, that's the first time I'm hearing of this. And when you're starting out like this, it kind of makes sense,
Mhm.
right? It's like almost half of your customers is willing to pay and stay, basically.
Mhm.
And then this can give you the feedback to say, like, okay, so what are some of the commonalities that these 40% have that we can then basically like focus our efforts on? And then that can, well, there's a lot of things that come afterwards, of course. Um, but I like this rule of 40 for like starting out. One of the questions that actually came to mind when you were talking about this, when you mentioned also like the runway, that is product market fit then different for bootstrapped versus like venture backed like companies? Or
I think in both cases, you do have a runway. And I think in venture capital, that runway is very well known and it's very clear between the investors and the founder. When the founder is bootstrapping the company, I think it becomes a lot more fluid, right? They've got they've got things that they're worried about at home, and they have to balance those things. And there are all kinds of things that happen at home. Not that it doesn't happen with a venture-backed company, but it's certainly a lot more volatile, I would say, for a founder. A first-time founder, a founder that's like 5 exits, like they get it. They know how to structure their runway and their financial model to, you know, insulate themselves from those kinds of things. But I think it still boils down to like, I've got an investment. I know how much we can afford to spend without getting revenue, for this period of time. And I also know the modeling of like, I'm not going to replace my funding right away. It's going to be incremental. And eventually I'm going to start to get some revenue. So then I'll know what my cash flow looks like month to month. But I still think that, having that good financial understanding of where you are and how much you have is still the same, whether you're venture backed or bootstrapping, for sure.
Yeah, again, that makes sense. Like that the time horizons are maybe a bit different, and like maybe some of the focus initially is like also a bit different, like traction versus maybe like a quicker road to profitability, depending on if you're backed versus bootstrapped. Because like the more profitable you are as a bootstrap company, like the more time you're basically buying but for yourself to like reach certain things. Um, okay, very interesting. So then again, back to the right customers. Like we've now basically given a definition or like your definition to product market fit, finding the right customer. So we've started out with like the rule of 40. You kind of have like an idea of product market fit and the people who are willing to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, What are certain things that you are looking for within the like batch of 40% that might tell you like, hey, this is the right customer for us to attract?
Right. Well, I mean, you first of all, you need to do some segmentation work in terms of understanding a bit of nuance, and that goes beyond just the firmographics of like the size, the industry,
Yeah.
et cetera. We start to look at things like their usage patterns, right? Um, what the way that they're using it, and not just the times and the amount of time that they're spending on it, and breaking it down into that way. You also look at not just the usage, but also the sales process, right? Um, there are some customers that are easier to sell to than others, right? So I think that plays a part into the process as well, right? Like if I wanted to go find low hanging fruit, like find the ones that are easy to sell to and use the product the most. Like, yeah, I think it's a no brainer. The reality is, Mike, though, is
Right.
that, a lot of young companies can't invest in the data infrastructure to sort of capture all that, right? It's just living in the head of a founder or living in the heads of the people just, getting shit done. And
Yeah.
it makes it a tough a process to figure out, okay, well, who are we really good with? And then you've got to go backwards and, enrich the data that you may or may not have, build out data, do a lot of surveys and things like that. And, when you only have 50 customers, that's not really a huge endeavor, but when you have 500, when you have 5,000,
Yep.
right. In some cases, small companies with a really niche product might grow pretty rapidly. And you're like, okay, how do I go from 5,000 to 50,000? And if I don't have any data yet on the 5,000, man, it's going to make it pretty tough to figure out, like, how do I take what worked there and apply it 10 times? Like, and so, um, a lot of times what I do is I always try to get to value first. I try to get through and build a playbook for something that falls, incrementally or completely solves an initial problem, right away. And then as I'm going through that process, I'm feeling the pain of like, man, if I only had this data on, the sales process, or if I only had this usage data, man, that would tell me a lot of what I need to know to sort of, pour gas on this fire. But I don't. Here's some of the tools that I can recommend that you look to implement, and
Yeah.
work with them to even procure those tools in a follow-up cycle, to do that, and say, okay, the next time we iterate this process, we'll have these tools that can help us. We'll have this data that can help us. And obviously, I put some structure and frameworks around the process to help them the next time around as well. So,
Oh man, segmentation. It's one of my favorite exercises to do. Really? Uh, because the way you're talking to people about segmentation, like it's always like geography, industry, maybe persona, and then there's like company size and all that like easily accessible stuff. But like the nuances within segmentation, like you can take it too far, but there's like like at least get some idea on usage, on adoption, and then like plot those against basically your sales and marketing efforts. Like, hey, who convert really well? Like, where do we have a very short sales cycle? Like, who have the least like amount of objections, basically, like who perceive value very well, and then try to replicate that like as quickly as possible because that's like a very smart thing to do more often than not. And then when it comes to like having the data in place, it can be difficult. For sales, I'm a bit biased because I believe it's very simple for sales because you can add drop-down fields relatively easily in your CRM to get started with. And then that's like a very like basic thing to do.
you-
And with all the enrichment tools out there, it should be relatively easy to get like at least a good understanding of the business that you're selling into. Usage data, adoption data, stuff like that, that's a bit more difficult because it requires also that your product allows you to track all this, and it might like require your technical team to implement certain things, but there are definitely a lot of tools out there that can help you really well with this. Um, Also, some of the things that I would like to add is maybe some financial data about the customers as well,
yeah.
which is also every now and then very interesting to see. Um, and so when you basically have done your segmentation exercise, you've identified the segments, and then you've seen like, hey, what is working and what isn't. Um, what are some of the things that flow out of this? So what like because we've identified it, sure, but now what?
Yeah. So, a lot of times the founders in the early team are really going out to market with a general and broad message, generic and broad message, I should say. Um, and what you'll find is that it has worked well enough for these early adopters because they were really, really eager to find a
Yeah.
solution to their problem, right? So they will hunt in any fishing hole. But when you want to make sure to scale something, you have to get a lot more specific. And that goes through illustrating use cases and case studies that fit a, you know, a target audience. Like you don't want to be trying to sell to banks, but talking about manufacturing problems, right? Because the banker's like, I don't understand it. That doesn't jive with what I'm doing. Uh, and even more so, and get more specific about bankers who are experiencing this particular problem. This is who we're good for, right? I think early on I was talking about my domain expertise and things like that. I'm like, this is how I'm crafting my ideal target customers because I know where I'm good and I know where I'm not so good, and I'm trying to stay within that lane. So how do I think
Yeah.
about those things? So and understanding their motivations and learning a lot more and immersing yourself into their world can help you better understand why it's valuable to do it the way that you do it versus the way that other alternatives do things. And you start to figure out, okay, now let's really double down on this positioning. Let's, talk about why we're different and why that's better than others. But even just different is good enough, right? Stating what is different about the way that you do SEO, right? Or the way that you do GRC is different, really starts to elicit the feelings of, okay, I can see why this is valuable. That's why I'm going there. And it's also helpful because, like I was mentioning before, when you're really a broad product, like the pre-work, the inputs and the outputs, to your slice of the pie can be wildly different. And it's only once you start to focus on specific types of people in a specific problem space that you can figure out, hey, there's some things that we can do on the front end that increase the value to this person. They're doing all this in office tools and by hand, and we now have the capacity to say, hey, we can build that out, which feeds our thing, and that's of more value for on the back end part of it, like reporting and analytics. Might also be a post tool add on to your product. But you won't know that just by adding an analytics engine, right? Like, okay, well, an analytics engine is good, but I can connect your tool to any one of 30 different analytics tools and do my own thing. What I want is some specific dashboards and widgets that show me things that I need to take action on. And that becomes the next release. And it's not only about, selling more easily, but also adding more value in the product, which goes back to what I was saying before, the voice of the market to the product, helping figure out what are those more specific things. And I go to a product, I'm like, hey, we need an analytics tool. You're like, what do you need an analytics tool for? Because I was a product manager, I had asked those questions all the time. I'm like, be a little bit more specific, like what do you want to see in there? And there may be some other ways that we can do that with an export, or, it's an on-screen visual that we already have. Like, what do you need? And that helps you really focus product management on, how do they deliver value and how do they understand what to build?
Yeah. It all comes down to understanding, like, when persona in industry, function, or whatever is trying to achieve X while working on like a certain thing and is using alternatives. Like, there's like a very like cool statement framework basically
Yeah.
that you can work around.
And even
So
that, bringing that to somebody is like eye-opening to some companies. Like, they're like, it's like, I don't
yeah.
know if you remember Mad Libs, right? The Mad Libs was this
Hmm.
like kids game or tool that people use, and it would be like, I could just fill in the words, and it's like, yeah, that's all you need. It's just needs to be a template. That's not what you're going to go say out to everything, but it at least grounds everybody in understanding of like, who
Yeah.
are we good for? And there's different ways to say that. And that's the difference between messaging, which is that framework you just mentioned, and copy, which is how we say it
Exactly.
and everywhere else.
Yeah.
So
And it also comes back to what you said in the beginning, that your entire go-to-market is like the combination of the product, the sales, the marketing, customer success. It's all tied back to into each other.
mhm.
And they can only work well together if we all basically have like the same definitions for things.
Mm.
Yeah. And so, okay, but so there's a lot of things that can basically tell you that you're maybe not attracting or closing the right types of customers. This is based on like the volume and the conversion of certain leads, the amount of expansion opportunities that you have, and basically your ability to retain your customers. You've already explained a little bit what you can do, like once you've started achieving like the product market fit,
Mhm.
and how you can then basically dive deeper into like who the right customer is with some basically like segmentation, how you can do this. We're not just looking at like the general stuff like industry and geography, but also really take like the product analytics or like the product usage and adoption into this, and then talk to them basically, like understand the why behind all of this, so that feeds them back into your like your positioning, your messaging, like the product development, etc. And then that is basically like the first thing. And then how you do this, like we're going to come to that um, a little bit towards the end, but we have now really talked about like the early stages. Like this is the beginning.
Mhm.
But let's say that like my team, like I've now hired like salespeople and I've hired like a marketeer. My development and product team is growing. There are certain people that are now also working on customer success. And my job as like the founder and CEO of the business is like my attention is being drawn into other directions than just talking to my customers and selling the product myself. Like basically like transitioning from like the founder-led sales to more of like a scalable go-to-market engine,
Mhm.
if you want to call it like this. But what are some of like the obstacles or hurdles that you need to like jump over to achieve all of this?
Well, I mean, first thing I would say is you've got to figure out whether or not your starting point is leaning towards a product-led self-service approach or a more high-touch sales-led approach. Um, Initially there's a lot of like uh, I wouldn't say fake it till you make it, but there's a lot of like building on the fly. Like you're building your product as it's being bought, and there's a lot of hand holding that's required until the product gets to a certain maturity level where, you know, it's got product market fit, which means that it solves a tangible problem right out of the box. There's not a whole lot of uh, missing parts to it. Um, but inevitably, like it just needs to scale. And at some point, you're either talking about a transition from founder led sales, high touch, to either high touch through a sales led organization. Like you said, you're hiring salespeople, or on the flip side, you have a product where, like, hey, maybe we want to build this a self-service model where you can try it out yourself for a while. The trial ends and you have a moment where you decide to pay for it. And, building that infrastructure in the product and, connecting it between your website and your product, can take quite some time. So I think that, initially you have to decide which way you're going to go. And I can just tell you that going in both directions is definitely a recipe for disaster. If you don't have the resourcing early on to make wide commitments, so what will you do? You will do two things very poorly. So
Yep.
figuring out where you want to go is, sometimes it's a founder's decision. They feel like the only way to do this is to sell it with high touch. And I'm going to be focusing on high touch customers. And, you know, high touch in a lot of cases is a longer road to closing a deal. But that might be like you say, okay, but I like the outcomes. The outcomes are bigger, sales, bigger volume and revenue, versus on the other side, um, you might also have it where you're just like, I can't scale this. Like this is too high touch. There are definitely some things that we need to do, maybe even a hybrid model where it's product led sales, which is like we do some automation to get customers to like that very tangible moment when they're ready to buy, and all I have to do is come in there and, you know, shake hands, kiss babies, whatever, and sign a contract, show my face as a founder. And that's the comfort that they need to sign the big check. But doing that for, you know, $50 a month from one person over and over again to get to 5,000 times a month, like there's no way you can do that. So I think that's normally the first thing you have to figure out is, where am I going to go first? Am I going to scale the problem first, or am I going to transition what I'm already doing to other salespeople who can then, you know, take on 3 times, 5 times, 10 times the volume that we need to grow the way we want to. So that's usually what I look at first.
Yeah. Make a decision, and then, I think it will come down to like certain things, like how complex is your solution? What's like the contract value that you're basically working with, and then also like your target audience again. Uh, yeah, there are certain factors that go into like choosing the right go-to-market motion, I believe so. So
Hey,
having these a little bit clear for yourself, yeah.
yeah, and you touched on something too. Like I was always only talking about the founder's vision for how we need to go. You have to also take into mind, like, how do your customers want to buy? Like, they might have endured
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
process, you know, hand holding you through there. They're like, hey, if you could have automated this through for me, I would perfect. Okay, great. We're
Yeah.
going to do that. That's going to be
They
our
bought it.
focus.
Yeah, they bought it despite
Right.
of
Exactly.
instead of.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Again, like I think this also then depends on like, hey, are we talking to the early adopter, early
Mhm.
evangelist customer, or bit of like the early majority of the market that might have different requirements, risk tolerance, etc. Which again then will tie back to in like how complex is this? What is like the process or the thing that you support or tie back into? I think that the biggest example or like the best example, like if you take something like Loom, which is a very basic like video tool, like low risk, not like tied to a very specific um process. You can use it in very like strategic processes, but still it's like a very basic use case and product versus an ERP tool, which is like the foundation of your business basically when you're in manufacturing. So there's a very like a very different like complexity like and contract value tied to both solutions, even though you might sell into the same business. So yeah, there like this is something that I always take into consideration, and then that would basically also lead towards different stuff because depending on the go-to-market motion that you're choosing, there are different ways, of course, that you're looking to scale this. So if we take like the three, I guess, main approaches that we have, which is we have like this marketing-led self-service. We have the more of like an marketing-led sales motion where you're doing like an inbound, outbound combination with sales.
Mhm.
And then have like the very like dedicated multiple, like a lot of different touches, high complex sales. They all have like their own different ways of scaling. So how would you look at this? What would you look at basically to make sure that each of these motions can become successful in scaling?
It's a good question. You know, there's a balance, uh, and I always focus on one playbook at a time. And when I go one playbook at a time, I'm usually focusing on a very particular segment of customers who like have certain needs and like to buy a certain way. And I think that usually dictates the the motion that you choose for that. And that's not to say that they're the only segment and that's the only playbook and therefore the only motion that we're going to implement. But we'll, iterate through that and say, okay, well, this is the segment. This is a different way that they like to buy. And they're in a lot of cases using the product a little bit differently, and they're comparing us to different alternatives than the segment, I was mentioning earlier. So that's typically my approach. And over time, you eventually accumulate a number of different motions, which can eventually, cause a lot of problems later on, right? Because you're like making investment decisions on like how many different motions and channels do we support. But I always go back to, well, that's an easy decision to make once you figure out like what's this segment, what's the value of that segment in terms of their willingness to pay for the product and how many of them are there. Then you can make a decision. Okay, well, this playbook costs us X a number of dollars per year, but it also returns this amount of annual revenue. And once you get it down to those two, numbers, variables, it becomes a very easy decision to make. If it's above a certain ratio, then you say, okay, we do it. If it's below a certain ratio, you're like, no, we can't afford this anymore.
Right. Yeah, you need like a good understanding of like the unit economics for the different
For sure.
segments, the different motions. It's a very broad and interesting topic that we're discussing here. So it's then that also kind of makes it like maybe a little bit difficult to really get tactical, because it depends on so many different things that we've already went over. But if I'm looking to become successful in, let's say, attracting and closing the right customers, and then like making the transition towards a more scalable go-to-market motion, I can imagine that there are like two things that go into this. So one, it's like how you would call like almost like the buyer journey, basically. And then this is more of like the outside. And then internally, we have our own processes. So when we start with like the buyer journey, like how would you help the B2B SaaS founders or teams that are looking to achieve those two outcomes, like attracting and closing the right customers and transition to the scalable go-to-market motion? So when it relates to this buyer journey, how would you help them to be successful in this?
Yeah. So
Is there like a framework or something that you might use?
yeah, actually, I prefer a buyer journey flywheel. And the reason is that I have found that, it's not just that it's a life cycle, but it feeds itself. The reason is that unless you're an early adopter, you don't want to be first. So you need that social proof, and testimonials or positive user reviews or referrals from, peers to really feed it. But at its core, I look at 3 stages, attracting leads, engaging them to convert them into customers, and delighting them once they are customers and keeping them happy and wanting to continue to use your product or even advocate for that product or expand and grow more. So that expansion, feeds the flywheel as well. It's like, okay, I've solved problem 1. You have this other product that solves problem 2. I want to adopt that, and so on and so forth. And I love this product so much, I'm going to tell my friends about it. They get into the flywheel, and it keeps, circling itself. On the other side of it, when you talk about the process, I also keep that pretty simple. There's just the analysis portion of it and doing your research and having good feedback loops and a steady flow of data, not stories, things, but actual data, and continuing to build and refine that infrastructure. And then the design process where you're looking at what is this research engine doing for us? What insights can I glean from it? What can I pull out? Where's there a good opportunity for me? And then how can I design a strategy and content strategy and go-to-market playbook to capitalize on that? And so throughout that process, you're involving customer feedback a bit, but you're also working with those other people in the go-to-market team, your customer success folks, the product people, right? The salespeople on the front end. You're all working on the same thing. You say, okay, this is what the data is showing us. Does everybody agree that they see the same insight and same opportunity? Because if they don't, then everything downstream becomes a mess. Nobody's aligned. Nobody
No.
believes in the thing that you're going to say. And that's the worst game of telephone ever, right? Because if the first translation of that message breaks down because I don't care, I don't believe in this message, it will never work to then go out to the public. It won't work in advertising. It won't work in sales conversations, etc. So, and then the last part of the go-to-market program is the enablement part. It's like, okay, now I've crafted this and we've all had some feedback on it. Now we're going to enable the rest of our sales organization. We're going to also enable the rest of the customer success organization so they understand what we're trying to message out to our customers. Going out and directly, if you are PLG motion, directly embedding those hooks in their product and understanding where they're at, what message do they need in that journey, and so on. So that's, those are the two main flywheels that we look
Yeah.
at.
This is like an entire like podcast series in itself, right? Just going into
Oh yeah.
each of the flywheels and then basically say like, okay, so this is their situation. We have this type of company,
Mhm.
this type of motion, this customer base, industry, blah, 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 blah. Now let's take a look at like the buyer journey, like the AED. So it's like bringing you back to life almost.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's like, at least that's how it's called here, I believe. The AED, it's on the wall when somebody has like a heart attack.
Oh yeah. I know what you're talking about. We just call them defibrillators, but I believe that there is
Yeah.
the AED. I understand what you're talking about.
And then, but then say like, okay, we're going to take a look at like the attract, the engage, the delight, and then like what does it actually mean? What do we take a look at? So this could be like a very fun follow-up conversation, basically, to go into these specifics of each of the processes
Yeah.
or the flywheels that you go to. Because if we're coming towards the end of our conversation here, and like we could go on and on about this forever because it's such a broad topic and there are so many like it depends answers to almost every question that is out there.
Yeah.
But in essence, like it all comes down to like attracting and closing the right customers and making sure that once you are growing as a business that you're able to actually scale towards or that you're able to transition towards something that is scalable. And the way that you do this is by basically making sure that the buyer journey is running as a flywheel. So it's basically feeding back into itself and make sure that it goes faster and faster and becomes bigger and bigger. And then there are, of course, like things that feed the flywheel to go faster. There are also certain things that might actually work against it, that is trying to slow it down. And then making sure that your internal process is aligned. You can take a look at basically like the analysis, design, and enablement flywheel that you've mentioned to make sure that you're making decisions based on the data that you've collected, the insights that you've gathered, make a like feed that basically into like the design in how you're doing the things that you're doing, and that you're also enabling like both your customers and your people within the organizations to be successful in all of this. Um, yeah, thank you so much, Jimmy. I'm curious. What would be like a very good indicator for a B2B SaaS founder that they can spot within their business that could be like a very good like starting point for them to get into conversation with?
Yeah. Um, a lot of times it's, they're at product market fit and they're now realizing that there's a new opportunity for them. That a lot of times the launch process was very much done ad hoc the first time they launched their initial product, and they know that they don't have the bandwidth to do that all over again because they're continuing to sell and do the things with their N1 product, and now N2 is going to take up time, and a lot of times they want to refine that process and have somebody that runs it. But there's also just like, hey, we're still trying to get to product market fit, and we don't know if it's the product or the message. Like, do we need to take a step back and look and say, the product works. I have all the faith in it. It just might be my approach. It just might be the way that I'm, articulating this message, that isn't compelling enough to make them make a decision, which, a lot of times companies just don't end up buying anything. And that's a loss on your books. But there's also ways that like, hey, we keep losing this alternative. We have to figure out a way to either fix the gap in our product or find a way to really emphasize this different thing that we do, that is not present in any other product, and really focus on that. And like I said, it's a lot of times it's not the message, it's the messenger. Or in some cases, it's not the product, it is the message. That's the problem. And that's what I, go in a lot of cases, figure out and say, okay, all you need to do is change this way you're doing it, change the way you're saying it, be a little bit more enthusiastic and confident in what we're saying. There's a lot of confidence building that happens that goes a long way in winning more deals, just because, so many sales reps are so unsure of themselves. They're like, I don't know. And like, no, you got to deliver it with confidence, and confidence is with repetition. We've got your back. This is what we're all agreeing, that this is our message. And now you can deliver that a lot more confidently. And as a result, win the trust of, the customers on the other end of this.
Awesome. I'm going to make sure that everybody is going to be able to find you easily. So like, I'm going to make sure that your website is in the show notes, your LinkedIn, etc. So that if they want to like get this off the ground or basically shoot it towards the moon, that they are able to find you. I close each and every podcast with the same 2 questions at the end.
Okay.
And these are basically geared towards the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey. And if you're able to talk to slightly younger Jamie, and then you're able to tell yourself 2 things, like, Jamie, this is one thing that you should stop doing immediately, like ditch it right away. And this is the one thing that you should keep on doing. What would you tell yourself?
Oh, so let me start with the thing I should stop doing. So creative wise, I'm good, but not great. My wife is definitely more creative of us. So that's one of those things where I have a concept, but I'm not necessarily as good at, the creative output. And this usually goes into the form of like creative art or even videos. Having somebody else execute that is probably in my best interest. I can give a lot of direction. Like I'm probably a great director. I'm just not a great actor or, costume designer or set director. Right. So that's probably one thing. And, it frees you up because, gosh, from a time management perspective, like I can't tell you how many times I've got everything down in an outline, and that takes me 20 minutes, and then making it creative or pop takes, 20 hours. And like my wife or somebody more talented would probably get that done in 20 minutes. So I would be done in an hour versus done in 2 days. So that's definitely something that I should probably start to do more. And I've got I've been fortunate to work with a lot of great creatives, and they love working with me. So it's just, let's make great things together. In terms of what I should do more of, or what I should have done, sooner. I think I said this on LinkedIn a few weeks ago. Like, just be bold. Like, when you have enough experience, your gut tells you the right way to go. And until somebody can prove you otherwise, just go with that. And, be feel free to talk about that and have your viewpoint and, deliver it. Don't be rude. Don't be closed to challenges, right? Like, if your idea is good enough, then it should withstand challenge. So don't run away from those types of challenge. Have healthy debate, and try to talk with people that definitely have different viewpoints that can challenge that, and it'll only make it stronger. It'll die the way it needs to die. There's nothing worse than the fool that keeps believing in the thing that doesn't make sense, or it is not actually factually true. So,
Yeah. I think it's like a very lovely quote. I don't know if it's like originally from him, but at least he's the one that brought it to my attention, from Alex Hormozy. And it was like something in like the line of like, everybody is willing to change their beliefs except for the ones we truly believe in. And those are the ones that we're basically like sticking to till the end of time.
yeah.
And I think I like that, like the healthy debate. I've recently read the book, Super Communicators. And it's like, hey, what is like that type of conversation that we are having? And then, like, are we talking about getting towards an outcome? Are we talking more about like more of like an emotional understanding of each other? And that is something where, like, if you're aware of the type of conversation that you have, or how you can steer it towards like one or the other, like that probably gives you a lot of room to have like these healthy debates and really like seek to understand than to be understood, basically. Yeah. I like this, Jamie. Thank you so much for sharing this. For now, I would like to thank everybody that's still listening. Like we mentioned before, if you want to like get to know a little bit more about Jamie and the way that he works and how he approaches like the problem solving for your go-to-market, I'm going to make sure that you can find him in the show notes. So definitely check him out. And for now, I wish you all a very lovely day, and until the next episode. Jamie, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike.